small group, but we're using mics because we're live streaming the event tonight. So welcome everybody, thanks for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new faces too. Tonight's event is in conjunction with the exhibition Artists as Knowledge Carriers, which is curated by Rachelle Pablo on our staff here. And I'd like to welcome her to say a few words, and then Viola Arduini will introduce the panelists and lead tonight's discussion. So thank you all for being here, and welcome Rachelle.
Yeah, hey, hello everyone. I am Rachelle Pablo. I am from the southern band of the Athabascan people, known as the Diné people, and also known as Navajo people. And I am of the Red Running Into the Water clan, born for the Water Comes Together clan. And I am a Diné woman. And I'd like to share a few words written by one of our advisory council members who's from the Jemez Pueblo, Roger Frawa. And, I just kind of want to address the challenges of like how the land acknowledgements have evolved to like, really sometimes problematic, but the reality is, as a Diné woman, wherever we enter, we acknowledge, the lands as well. And Roger Frawa writes, Albuquerque is currently built on the ancestral lands of the 19 Puebloan nations that was shared with the Mescalero and Jicarilla Apache nations, the Utes, and later the Diné. The respective ancestors, those living today and the unborn, this land has always been, is currently, and will always be for the winged, fin, and four-legged. We are acknowledging the sacred living waters and rivers that cross this land. Finally, the sun, the moon, and the stars and planets that keep our systems in balance. We welcome all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rachelle. So welcome everyone tonight, and this is actually our first event for this exhibition. So artists as knowledge carriers that surround us, that is above us. It's the current exhibition that runs until May, and it was intended, and it is, as a celebration of mentorship and a celebration. This microphone is keep running off. Let's try this one. As a celebration of the mentors and I would say also the students that grow and populate and nourish and challenge in higher education in the state. I also, since it's the first event, I will also like to remind a couple of others. It's a very rich month coming up, our next event, and all of these really celebrate and explore education and mentorship in different ways. So if it's a topic you're interested in, I truly invite you for the next couple of events. So the next one is Sunday, April 2nd, at 4 p.m. and will be at Site Santa Fe. And it's part of our collaboration, Deserto Mountain Time, that we are part with 14, I think that grew, 16 now, organization from Colorado to Mexico. And the title of the event is Radical Expansions, a Civil Dialogue Through Art and Education. It's another panel. We have, among others, Jamie Blosser, the Santa Fe Art Institute director, Daisy Quesada Ureña, the also artist in this exhibition, Bianca Castigliero from Juarez, and myself. I know that's kind of a bit weird. And then the moderator will be Matthew Contos, the director of Site Santa Fe. So if you're around, that's April 2nd. And then our last event will be Sunday, April 16 at 3 p.m. here, and is From Decimas to Spoken Word. And is an event about, it's a literary event with Afromundo Collective, featuring Dr. Eleuterio Santiago Diaz, Brazilian poets Mel Guelvara Adun, and young poets Monica Aguilar, Jay Gordon, and Leonardo Pita. Let's jump into this conversation with our panelists today. A technical notice, unfortunately, James Rivera was unable to make it. There was an unforeseen circumstance, so we're gonna run as we are. I'm gonna introduce our panelists and then start the conversation. In not particular order, we have Marcella Ernest. Marcella is Ojibwe. She's Gunflint, Lake Chippewa, and an enrolled member of the Bed River Band of Lake Superior, and has heritage that includes Eastern European ancestry. Marcella is a native feminist theorist of visual culture, sound studies, and contemporary art, who engages collaborative works both intellectually and as practice. She has worked with tribal education, rural and urban communities, and Native youth for over 20 years. Her archival research and processes of historical interpretation has led to explorations of visual textures combined with audio experiments. Currently, her work draws from oral histories and family photos as sites of memory and open-ended reflections of politics of place, and the varying relationships between local art history, gender, and indigenous land justice. Marcella holds a PhD in American Studies. She's currently an assistant professor of native art history with the Department of Art Studio, Art History and Education at the University of New Mexico. So let's welcome Marcella. Our next panelist, Carissa Samaniego, is an interdisciplinary artist and educator whose work builds visual narratives of American identity with a feminist mestiza voice. Her work is fueled by intergenerational knowledge, regional folklore, and the vernacular landscape of places where she lives and works. It is further informed by border theory, the Nepantla condition, mestiza consciousness, and intersectional feminism, to make space for understanding ourselves and the world behind colonial and patriarchal binaries. She uses sculpture, textiles, video, drawings, and found borrowed text as both the tools and products of narrative and philosophical inquiry. Samaniego holds an MFA from the University of Colorado Boulder and a BA from St. Catherine University, and she's currently visiting assistant professor of sculpture at New Mexico State University in Las Cruces. Last but not least, Jazmin. Jazmin Novak is a Diné sculptor who works in various mediums. She was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and she's currently based in Santa Fe. Having grown up in the Southwest, she's influenced by the desert's environment, and her work reflects the sensitivity and awareness found in this landscape. Novak received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Studio Art with a minor in Performing Arts from the Institute of American Indian Arts. Through her study, she focused her practice on various metal casting using the lost works process. Novak works as an artist with Meow Wolf as well as an independent artist. Currently, she's an adjunct professor at the Institute of the American Indian Arts, teaching the special topics in sculpture, sculpted environments, and Imagineering course. Okay, so, welcome all and thank you. I prepared some questions that I share with you, but I also hope that this can be a conversation and a way to share your experience and your ideas about mentorship, teaching, intergenerational, intercultural relationships within them. To start, I'm gonna start from the connection itself. I found in my experience as an educator that creating the relation with the students is the most important and the first step necessary for the process and the action of teaching. is kind of the building bridges with the students that we share the classroom with. So in your experience as a mentor, in this creating relationship between learners and the teachers, particularly think about relation that to cross generations, cultures, disciplines. What is your experience, and what is maybe your approach, if you have one, or your advice? Someone wants to?
How do you go first?
All right, let's test. Is that okay? All right. This is like sort of central to my pedagogical perspective, I suppose. I truly try to understand my students from day one. I think it's important for me to know them and know their interests outside of the classroom in order for me to teach to them. Things like we spend time in the beginning of my classes getting to know each other. Maybe you could call it bonding or something like that. But it's like, what do you do? Like, who are you as a person? It's not. I don't think of my students as like this blank slate that I'm going to impress my knowledge on, but instead that we are sort of in this experience together, and it's a dynamic relationship that is always changing. And I think also something that I take with me from one of my mentors at University of Colorado Boulder, James Cordova, who grew up in Santa Fe, and he's a fellow New Mexican, but he was a mentor and advisor to me when I was doing my MFA program there, and he had me read something by Mignolo, I think, but on your locus of enunciation. And so I also always try to explain to my students sort of what my worldview is and where my teaching is coming from, because I think it's important to be transparent about that. That I'm not telling truths, I'm not trying to create all these truisms or convince somebody that what I'm saying is fact, but instead this is a perspective of the world that I'm sharing, and for you to understand where my positionality is going to be, you'll be able to sort of like discern what I'm saying more, sort of judge it or take it, or, but I guess I like to try to maintain, that sort of like a level of agency for my students so that they can sort of make those decisions about their education and learning process. Yeah.
Go down the line. Hello, group. I'm Marcella, just in case.
I was confusing.
So this is a good question. It's broad and I like it. I was thinking about it a lot. And I would have to say, to answer that first, I think that I started out after high school at the Institute of American Indian Arts. And that, I think, changed and continues to influence the way that I teach and the way that I interact with even colleagues and people as well. And the way that it does that is through, I think a word that I use a lot in my classes is relationality. It's the ality is why it gets into my classes, right? But really that means relationships, and how we can treat each other with in these spaces through care, And that's not to say we can't disagree with each other or critique each other or things like that, but that the space we create becomes important and we treat each other like relatives, and that's something I do inside my classes from the first day. More so the second day, because on the first day people leave, so I don't want to waste our time. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But it is more so the second day, the second time we meet, and then it just continues. And I have no intentions ever of at the end of the semester that I'm done with this relationship. It continues. It is ongoing. And that's something that I've learned culturally, growing up and being an Ojibwe person, but also, as I said, starting out in my formative years when I was young, I'm like 17, and I'm at IAIA, and the teachers were interacting with me differently than any of my high school teachers had. And I was going to their house for dinner, and things like that, and that continued through. Since then I've gotten all these degrees. I've never not had a Native female mentor in any of my schools, and that was intentional, right? So I didn't go to schools because they were the school. I went to the schools because of who was there, and that I hope is something that I can do for UNM and our history. Is provide a space or a place where somebody wants to go there for those relationality practices, not for who's there, not just me, but also my colleagues too, so.
So I'm Jasmine. This is actually my first year of teaching, so it's been interesting, and it's definitely been a learning experience. And I think kind of where I'm at right now is I've been very fortunate and very lucky to have very strong and great mentors and leaders. And so now that I'm stepping into this role, I kind of look back on that and seeing, what part of our relationship that I really value and that has really helped me and pushed me to kind of where I'm at now. And so kind of trying to mimic that, but also, take that and make it my own. And I, in general, kind of struggle with communication, so that's been like a big part. And kind of the way around that, and the great thing about art is that you don't always need to communicate verbally. Like, we can be in the studio and I can be with students and I can see what they're working on. And I bring my own art into the studio too, so they see what I'm working on. And so we have a lot of conversations that maybe don't happen verbally, but happen through the art. And I think that has helped a lot with, this process and kind of developing like who I'm going to be as a mentor and a teacher.
Wow, thank you. Just kind of listening from your answers, I think the word care really stood out for me, and care in, I think Carissa, you mentioned that you care for what you're teaching, that I found to be a very important thing to keep at the center. I remember the first time I was teaching on my own, I tried to do what the professor I was TA the semester before was doing, and I was like, is this not working? And I think because I wasn't caring in the same way, I was trying to be someone else's voice. But then also, Marcella, as you say, they care for each other, and that's probably the base of every relationship. So that's kind of what stood up for me. I don't know. It's more a comment than a question, right? I guess following with a real question, kind of stay on the same topic of how building these relations, how building this relationality and connections. I was thinking, what are the challenges that you found? And I was particularly thinking, in the post-pandemic, we are still wherever we are in the history of that, but the coming back to the classroom, that's what I was thinking, and what maybe new challenges, if any, brought, or what other recent major events that you see outside the classroom as kind of being transformative for you as educators. So challenges and transformations.
So like I said before, I wasn't teaching when we were kind of in the larger part of the pandemic, where it was online, but I was a student. And I guess my perspective being a student was, first there was the loss of the studio and kind of, being put out on my own a lot sooner than I imagined that I would be, and kind of having to deal with that while still maintaining my art practice and trying to learn. But I think the biggest challenge for me in that was, again, kind of back to I said in the first answer, I guess, is the relationship building. And I think with art and the way that my process of creation is based on again, less verbal, but more kind of like, you know, feeling and response. And so not having people around and trying to create and, you know, show pieces on Zoom and try to get across, you know, what that piece meant was very challenging in multiple ways, but also, you know, like, on Zoom, you have to say everything. You don't get the sense of what the audience is feeling. You can't read people. It just changed kind of everything. And so trying to figure out how to effectively communicate and effectively create art in that environment was very challenging.
I love that this is your first year teaching. I really do. Good luck. So something for me, I think that is a lot, I would say most of my students, and I hate to call them mine, but students that are in my courses or that I have the opportunity to work with, they are also teaching. Because UNM, the grad students, have the opportunity to be teaching assistants. So it's also their first year teaching, and they're also learning. So they're in a class and they're teaching. I think that's their challenge, not my challenge, which is your question, I know. But for teaching in that space, for me anyway, if I go back to that relationality and, you know, being in relationship with them, even during the pandemic and now, I feel like an obligation to keep that in mind for them. Not so much workload-wise, although I consider it, but methods, you know, like, so if I'm teaching something, then I try to remember to explain to them why we're doing it, or why we're doing it in this particular way. And it's not to justify what I'm doing, but it's to share with them things that they can do in their spaces that they teach in, because, you know, you especially, like, when it's your first year teaching, you don't really go through like an onboarding process or to teach you how to communicate with people. You know, like, no one tells you how to effectively communicate. You can be the best sculptor in the world, and that doesn't mean you know how to effectively communicate with words with students that are going through their own life. So I think that's a challenge all the time, not just for me, but for them too. So together, again, we're kind of balancing these times and these moments. And the pandemic was not really anything different than that, but just more intensified, you know, I think. I taught during, so my last quarter at one of the UCs was the spring of 2020. So we end our, you know what I'm saying, they're divided into quarters instead of semesters. So our last day was the day that things shut down. And then we got spring break, and for an institution, they pivoted pretty well, because then our first day of spring quarter was in March 2020. So by the fall, when I came here to UNM as a postdoctoral scholar person, I had already taught for a complete beginning to end quarter in the pandemic on Zoom. So it was a professional. I'm just kidding, I wasn't, but you know, I was able to not be as nervous going into it, I think. But I think it's always a challenge. Like, every day is a challenge when you have to show up anywhere sometimes, you know? Okay, so. You're lucky I'm here. I'm totally kidding.
Time is relative, or all those things, right? So, I didn't teach during the pandemic. I was teaching online prior to the pandemic at a art school outside of Denver, or in Denver rather, Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. And I've been teaching in person, then I transitioned to teaching online because I have a daughter. She's now 5, but at the time she was like 1.5, 2, and so I was like, maybe online would be a little easier. And I hated it. I hate online teaching. Like, it is not for me. I understand it works for some people. I'm not saying that it's an entirely wrong thing. It's like, it's just, my brain doesn't work that way. I have no, speaking of being, like, I have no motivation to do anything online. Like, I can't do it. So I did it, and then the pandemic happened. I was like, oh no, I'm out. Like, I cannot, everything, because I was going to switch to in person, back to in person. We were also, of course. And then everything was going online. I was like, all right, I gotta take a break for a minute because I don't want to do this all the time. And so then I've been here at NMSU for this past academic year, and it's been really wonderful, and I'm teaching all in person. But I do feel like I have to sort of like, it's like we're all stiff, and we have to like sort of shake it out a little bit, and like, yeah, because well, everyone is like, we use this online, what are they called? Learning thing, whatever, yeah, it's called Canvas, whatever it is. And, okay, that just, oh my gosh, but everyone's like glued to the canvas, like, you know, they're oh, it says this, or like, it doesn't say this, and I'm like, I'm here, a person, I'm right here, you can ask me, I told you in class, like, so I'm having to sort of retrain my students, I feel like, I've been retraining, and well, not myself, because I wasn't online, but like, we operate in the physical world in this class, and again, like to speak to the first question, like it is a dynamic environment, and I cannot recreate it. I'm not interested in recreating it when, you know, online. Like what you contribute as a person in this, you're going to bring up a question that I can't predict, or, you know, and then it's something, yeah, it's something unique and of that moment. And so I think we're like getting back, like people are a little less attached to their Canvas thing and a little more like attentive to what I'm saying in class. Which, yeah, I'd say that was like a challenge. There was a challenge, and what else did you, there was
It was like
another thought.
change the what's the challenge not
Yeah.
related, so.
Yeah, and transformative, I think. So one thing, it's kind of a long, I'm not going to skip the beginning of the story, but I'll tell you that what I realized is that some of the things that used to sort of be normal, or like that we would do, like social functions, like, you know, if there was an exhibition, that we would have like a gathering afterward, or that students would do sort of just, you know, like there's so much community building and socialization that's part of I think any education program really, and we've lost a lot of that. You know, it's still not even all the way returned. But one thing, some of my sculpture students, and I should also say that my MFA is in sculpture and post-studio practice. So what that means is that I sort of have a methodology of working. My research comes often from outside of the studio, but like a lot of my work happens in the real world, and not that the studio is not the real world, but you know, like outside the studio, okay? And so some of my students were interested in what does that mean, and you know, all these things, and I was talking to them about, you know, sort of doing site-based research and field work, and they're like, can we start a sculpture club to do this? And I was like, well, let me think about it. And then I was thinking about the social events that are not happening. And so we sort of started this informal club called Art Rodeo Social Hour, or Social Club, Art Rodeo Social Club. But we're not focused on any kind of art making, but we are, we're thinking about like, just how can we maybe put together a project, like an exhibition or a critique night or film night or something where we're just spending time together and sort of like rebuilding the social fabric. So I think the transformation, to get back to the original point, is that like I think I took a lot of things for granted before, you know, and now I sort of, I'm realizing that all these things that, like the parts of, like they all take work, you know, and we all have to be active at working towards these things. So it's been a learning opportunity for me, and yeah.
How can we get into this Art Rodeo Social Club?
Right here.
That's where the cool things happen.
We're not exclusive.
Well, thank you. yeah, I think Marcella, what you say about the why is like why we do the things the way we do the things. Maybe it's one of those things. It's one of those parts that were maybe more granted, and the communication and the fabric needs to be rebuilt. And I think that's a very good point, as well as offering the opportunity to be together. Yeah, downtown Albuquerque. I would love to stay more on this question, but I may go on for now, and then if we have time, I would love to come back. Another, when I was thinking about this panel and thinking about at least what the educative relation, the pedagogy that meant for me, I always found, Carissa mentioned something about the student on my white canvas, so there is like the understanding and the making space for the person that is in our classroom. But I also found that there is this maybe very traditional and very old and I hope past idea of teaching as like I have the information, you get the information, and I personally am taking STEM education right now, and it still feels a bit stiff into that hierarchy. Thanks humanities, so therefore be a bit more advanced in that. So my question is, if you believe that is more cross-contamination, cross-pollination, if it's a relation that goes two directions, and if so, what's the things, the most important things or things you want to share that you learn from your students? It was a bit convoluted question, so I hope.
I have the funny things, kind of.
So I learned what deep fried is? Deep fried? Is that it? Like a deep fried meme? Is it? Am I saying it right?
Are you looking for?
Who knows? Shoot. Yeah. Okay. I learned that. I think it's deep fried. I'm pretty sure it's deep fried. I learned that. I learned that it means like a meme that's been like over and over and over used. So it's like so like omnipresent or something that it's like deep fried. I think I'm explaining that. That's what I gathered.
It's like iconography of memes.
Yes, I learned that when you have your Crocs, when you have the thing on the strap on the back, when it's up on top of your shoe, when it's down, it's called sports mode. So you're like ready to go. I learned like funny things like that I think are really important. Like I want to always be relevant. I want to know what people are interested in and talking about, and I want to know I don't want to ever say, I hope I'm never one of those people who's like, oh, that generation, because I think that I do agree, I do believe that we all have things to learn from one another. And I think something that I'm learning from my students right now, in all seriousness, is the way that they are, and I don't know if I can't think of like a specific student, I'm trying to think, but it's more sort of the maybe, what do you, like if I'm a millennial, what's that called again? Millennial Gen X. Is that what it's called? Anyway, okay, so
I'm gonna start taking notes.
No. Well, the Gen Zers, let's say, okay, that they are a bit more. Well, first of all, I think they have optimism, that I really appreciate, and I think that there's also they have a bit more. How do I say? Like they don't mind taking up space quite. Like they're okay saying like, hey, I need this from somebody. I need, and so I observe that in my students, and I like it's opened my eyes. I also grew up partially in rural Minnesota, where you're supposed to like not take up any space, and like you're quiet. But I think but I also, that's just speaking to sort of the younger generations. I also have, I have many students who are older than me in my classes. So I don't want to imply that my students are younger than me or that are a different generation under me or something, because I also have older students in my class, and from all of my students, I learn stuff all the time from them, actually. Yeah, all the time. We're always learning. We're always talking. We talk a lot in my class. And it's about, cultural stuff that comes up, about, I don't know that it's so much like technique things that I learn. Like, I'm teaching sculpture, so I feel like that's some of the skills that I'm giving them, but they might bring in an interesting material or, but certainly worldviews too. Right now I'm teaching the graduate seminar, and I have one student from Ghana and another student from Iran, and I've been trying to, so that I can be a good teacher, trying to understand sort of their experience and what was their art school like. And so I've been, reading theorists and thinkers that come from these regions that I had not even thought about before. So I'm also learning those things. I learn a lot from my students. I think that's why I like teaching, actually, because I do learn things all the time. I feel very satisfied intellectually from the work. So.
Switch it up even
Okay. So I'll give you a little bit of background in the class. And so the class I teach, we build a 6 by 6 by 6 foot sculpted environment. And it's, we start with metal, and we develop a concept, and we build it out, and then we sculpt it in cement. And it's pretty open-ended, but we do have kind of 3 main points that we need to stick to. And so one of them is, a man-made object, some type of rock work, and then some type of wood. But within those, that can be interpreted in so many ways. And so what I've learned, and kind of the most exciting thing, is just kind of seeing what's important to each student in the class and their cultural backgrounds and events that happen to them that were really impactful. And I have so many students in my class. It's so diverse. I have students who are just coming in with no sculptural knowledge, and students who have some, and just seeing how their ideas translate, and it pushes me to do research and do it and kind of understand where they're coming from and why these things are important to them, and how I can effectively help them create these in a way that is true to their vision, and just also so I know the history and I know what we're creating. And so that's kind of right now what's been the biggest learning experience for me, is just that eye-opening events kind of right at the beginning that go through the whole class.
Thank you. What do I learn from them? I learned about Crocs too, actually, last spring. I learned about Crocs. No, I don't. They're a thing. And I learned about the little things you put in them. I even had a student text me and be like, "Oh, I heard," not in my class, about this Croc conversation, and gave me a tip on where to go and put quarters in the machine and get the plastics. Yeah, and I'm the parent, so I was like, "This is amazing." So I do learn really useful day-to-day things. Last week I went home and I'm like, "Did you know that Miley Cyrus's song is actually for Bruno Mars?" How that comes up in Native art history. Yeah, I know that. I know that now. And so I was going to say vocabulary, though, and I mean vocabulary in a sense of the way we use words. And I teach a class, for example, right now called Queer Indigenous Expressions. Yeah? So I teach art history classes. So I don't get to teach studio classes. But I teach studio arts students in art history. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? Okay. So I feel like what I learn from them is that they think altogether differently. And that's fine, because I do too. That's why I like them. but also the words that I use are different because I'm from a different generation, even if they're older than me or younger than me. So in this queer indigenous expressions class, for example, we're using keywords like queer. Well, queer was used very differently for me growing up than it is for them now. Even things like pronouns. Like I'm constantly having to retrain myself on this new language. So we're having the same conversations, and then at some point you're like, wait, I think we're talking about two different things, you know, because of the way words have been changed and taken up on, you know, especially in that course right now. So we learn from each other, you know, where we learn how things have changed over time. And you know, I mean, that's just one example. Other things I learned, I don't know if I learn it, but I think that we share collectively confidence with each other. That's my experience anyways. These questions are probably for them better than for me. But you know, I think confidence is something that, you know, if we spend an hour together or 3 hours together, that at the end of that day or at the end of that week, we slowly start to feel more confident in our vocabulary, in our studies, in our practice, and in our relationships with each other, our relationships outside of each other. You know, confidence is very important for all of us, especially if we're in an intellectual environment. You know, so I want to encourage them to consider themselves to be visual scholars, and then in return they give me confidence to know that I know how to mentor them to do that when I see them doing it. So when I see them doing it, it's like you actually get to go home at the end of the semester or year or day or hour and think that all that stuff you did to get into a teaching position, you know, and all that attention and learning, that you have the abilities to share it with other people. And that's a good feeling, I think. So that's something I learned.
Yeah.
Share confidence. I like that. Yeah, thank you, all of you, for your answers and for sharing what is shared. Going on with a slightly different topic. I mean, all of you teach in higher education specifically now, and that's kind of what I was thinking while thinking about this question. And, you know, kind of working in, some of you mentioned multigenerational classrooms, so with students of different generations, and that's not something also sometimes just think students as younger, and it's not the case, and that's the beauty of that as well. Multicultural classrooms as well. How, like, what you think is important to balance, to serve the kind of diversity in the classroom, and also maybe a bit provocative, what you think higher education is doing or maybe not as today to do it.
I'm afraid of that last question because you're streaming this.
Okay, wait, let me not lose my, so it's how are we sort of serving intergenerational and intercultural students in our classrooms, and then how is the institution doing it or not doing it? Kind of.
If you want. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you know, I think that I this is not unique to the place that I work at, so I will speak to it. It's higher education in general, and you know, you hear it on the news, right? Like people are fearful to teach anything controversial or to say something that could ruffle feathers, and I do feel confident at the place where I'm teaching right now that I don't have to fear that. I don't feel that fear, but I know that that's a thing that is present, and I felt it when I taught at other places, for sure, definitely. And I think I also, I taught at a for-profit private art school, so that's a whole different sort of can of worms, but I do, they very much like a student at a school like that is seen as like sort of the client. And I think that for lots of reasons that other public universities are adopting that sort of mentality as like you're serving this client. And I think that's a really unfortunate relationship because it does, it can influence the content and the quality of what you're teaching. It can sort of restrict it and constrain you because you're worried about things that really shouldn't be part of the worry. That's a capitalist problem and not a, sort of like a knowledge sharing problem, right? And so I try to be like, I do try to be aware of that and like shake those pressures off whenever I feel them, because I think that's a disservice to what higher education can be. And then in terms of like the intercultural and or intergenerational, like having sort of these really interesting classrooms. I think that for a long time I've taught these kinds of like groups, and so I don't know specifically what I do different. I think like that's also sort of central to my pedagogy. Like everything I do is meant to sort of it's not geared towards one kind of learner or one kind of artist or one kind of thinker. It's we talk about sort of being able to, like you were saying, Marcella, disagree, but to do it in a respectful way, and to share our perspectives and our worldviews without feeling like we're slighted or not seen by people who have differing opinions. And I think, sort of, maybe perhaps, I don't know if this is from I don't know, but I think that maybe it's because I'm a Libra. Maybe that's what it is. Okay, I'm a Libra, so I think about things from multiple perspectives all the time. Like I'm always thinking like, the opposite. Okay, there. Yeah. So I think that it's sort of it does sort of feel like a natural position for me to take to try to consider multiple perspectives, but I think that's really important, and that's probably why I like teaching so much, also because I think that students do respond to that. They feel safe and cared for in these spaces where even if their opinion is different than mine, that it's as valuable and that we will hear it.
So this is speaking to how do we serve in intergenerational and how do the institutions?
Yeah, intercultural, intergenerational.
Okay, yeah. So again, like I teach native art and history, I like to say. So we can't really begin to unpack the art without unpacking history. That's just period. And that history is not a feel-good space, really, or conversation. I'll say conversation. It's just not, and it can be when we start to get into futurisms and now, but really, sitting down and unpacking, breaking down colonialism and critiquing white social norms is something that me and my students do regularly, all the time, and every class. Whether the institution supports that or not, we'll find out. But it's necessary. If you want to include native art, contemporary native art, into a dialogue of art, then you have to get through the history, or else you're not having the conversation that the artist is trying to have with you, and that's a disrespect of so many things. So intergenerationally, there's all kinds of different experiences and opinions in those conversations. And so how do we do that is usually start with positionalities, working even for an assignment, working on positionality statements. How would we position ourselves? How do we position ourselves in our writing? how do we position ourselves to say like, hey, I'm gonna work in a museum, or I'm gonna be work in a gallery, but I'm a white cis male, or like, and being confident and accountable to who we are and where we come from. And once that's over, not only do we learn about each other in ways that we wouldn't normally, we're able to have more honest conversations and ask questions, that are important questions to ask, so that they don't feel uncomfortable to ask a question like they're gonna offend somebody, because we're learning how to respectfully engage by centering ourselves from within. And that, in a lot of ways, that means where we come from many generations back. And for a lot of them, they learn that, or they have to ask and understand those things. And that's a lot of work to do in a semester, so I always commend them for doing that. But I think at the other end, I don't know what they think, I think at the other end, they come out with stronger work, stronger practice, and more accountable research. And if the institution isn't in support of that, then I don't want to be in support of the institution.
Yeah, so like I've been very fortunate to, I went to school at IAIA and I teach at IAIA, and they're very welcoming to every culture and every generation. And in my classes, I have both. And I think kind of like, like some of, I wouldn't say issues, but like some of these things that this has brought up is kind of, I kind of let them know where I'm at and where I'm coming from, and that I don't know everything that they're going to present, and I don't know all their stories, but I'm open to learning, and I will do research, and I will meet them where they're at as much as I can. And just being open to all of their ideas and all of their history. And we do have a research aspect of the class, and I keep that very broad. It doesn't have to be written research. It doesn't have to be, from the library. It can be stories from parents. It can be stories from, oral history from anywhere. So just making sure that students know that although we do have to have research and we do have to have a story, it doesn't necessarily have to, come from traditional ways, and we can be open in how we present this and how we gain this knowledge.
Thank you. Seems like history and honesty may be the two themes that keep recurring in this, and it seems important. Thank you for sharing. So we're going almost through the hour. I'm going to ask the last question. That's also a question that looks at the future a little bit, and then we can open for the public if there is more questions in the room, or we continue conversation. But yeah, so the final question I had for you, I think a big part of the vocation that is teaching is also that you're always almost always keeping yourself and going, forward, and you are in relation with, in particular, art historians and artists. They are going through school now, and they will be the next generation. So, whatever generation means. But so looking at the future, and you being in a classroom and you being in relation with the students, like, you see any commonalities, strength, emergence coming from the students you've been teaching? Like what comes up? What is what's appearing? What is shared in kind of the, maybe go back to the generational conversation a bit, but sensibility, strength, ideas, if there is commonalities there or emergence, what you're seeing.
So I would say a reoccurring theme, and this is for college teaching, because I also work with K through 12 in New Mexico. And I'm not a teacher, but I work with teachers who teach. Okay, they have other reoccurring themes, but in the college environment or the college classroom, something. And I say I'm going to go first so I don't forget, because when you said the question, I thought of it. And I think that I don't think, I know. It feels to me like, as somebody that gets to be has the opportunity to be a facilitator, right? So that's what I do. I feel like I facilitate and learn, and they also facilitate and learn. But there's also a fine line in balancing that, right? Like I respect them and they respect me. That's the goal. And so far that works really well. And so that they know that they can always ask me for things or support, because they tell them they can, right? Like, you can ask me for a letter of recommendation if you need one. And that's like an agreement that I make with them. So in those like spaces though, where I'm facilitating and they're learning, and then they're facilitating and I'm learning, something that keeps reoccurring that didn't used to reoccur as much in the past is this imagining futures. You know, I feel like in the at least this cohort, plural, they're imagining new possibilities that I haven't heard people have the confidence to imagine before. You know, so they have so much more confidence than me and my peers had. Maybe too much confidence. And that's a great thing, and I feel like the worlds that they're imagining, one of the students the other day called it, and they will correct me if I say this wrong, but it was nasty or dirty surrealism is our only way out. And, you know, because especially when we're deconstructing colonialism and capitalism and patriarchy, it's like you have to take a moment and be like, where do we go from here, you know? And they are exceptional at imagining new possibilities, imagining ways to build upon rubble, if you will, you know? And that gives me like an amazingly confident, again, I'll keep using that word, feeling for all of our collective futures, because they are actively imagining new possibilities, and that feels necessary.
Yeah. I think that something that I see, maybe it's a post-pan, like a return to the classroom thing, but something that I've noticed, and I think maybe it's also, I feel this way, so I'm projecting a bit, but I think that people are really excited about making things, like just making, like getting into materials and making things, and more so than even when, like I think, you know, maybe we're recovering from the 70s and 80s or something, but we, like, to have someone's impression, their touch, their like human imprint in the work. I'm seeing that a lot with students, like that they want to know skills again. Like I think there was sort of a disinterest or a sort of a like, I can fabricate, like I'll just fab that out. I don't need to learn how to do this. This is just about my ideas, right? But I've seen a lot more students interested in learning all of these like skill, how to do things with your hands, how to make things. I want to like touch the real world and be a part of it, and that's really exciting. I think another thing that I see a lot of students talking about, and it could be because you were also just thinking about where you come from, but students thinking about home and what home is, and how home shapes them, and whatever that is, how they define that. Yeah, I see a lot of those kinds of conversations right now. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess one of the bigger things I've noticed is, you know, coming out of the pandemic, and I think everyone felt this need, was just being next to people and talking to people. And so what I've noticed a lot is there seems to be a lot more collaboration going on, and a lot more of artists coming together to create either collectives or artwork, or even in like performing art, like just the coming together of people just to create work, and I think it's really great. And I think before I didn't notice it as much. I think it was more the idea of kind of like you wanted to get your name out there and kind of stand alone and create all these great artworks. But now, not only because I work at Meow Wolf, but I think the idea of having a collective has really started to kind of take a larger form, and I think people are more receptive to that than they were before, and you can kind of be in a collective and have more confidence than you may have had before.
Thank you. So I wrote down some of the words that were buzzing, and I think the future may be a collaborative, material-centered, futurist collective home. That's what we got.
Also, you figured out your PhD topic.
Not bad. I will live in the future. Okay, before we close, if you have any questions from the audience, yeah.
We're gonna have to run a bit around with this microphone.
So I'm very thankful for all of your collective experience at IAIA. It certainly is different from my own. I went there in 2019, and within the one semester I was there, I ran into an incredibly racist teacher who had, given her students developmentally inappropriate materials that were like 5th grade reading level during English class, and I brought it up to a lot of the faculty, and it just didn't really get anywhere. I ended up being forcibly removed from the class. It was a whole ordeal, but at its core, there is a lot of sort of white saviorism that exists in academia. And so I'm sort of wondering, how do we get this sort of, because a lot of these teachers do still care about their students, but it's misplaced. I'm wondering, how do we get from that sort of section of IAIA and education abroad to where you all are at with your culture of care and how much you pay attention to your Indigenous students? How do we sort of bridge that gap? And as well, in your practices, how have you gone through the process of killing your inner white savior?
Anyone wants to say it?
Well, I think to go back to thinking about history and your own positionality is really important, and to be introspective and think about why do you believe the things that you believe? Like how has that all been built up, and what parts of it are from, colonial thought and patriarchal thought, and we sort of we've decided to abide by these social contracts or social norms, whatever you want to call them, but we can also choose differently if you identify what they are. And so I think it requires a lot of investigating how you have formulated your worldview in the first place, right? And where all of those influences are. And then also to genuinely respect you, like the knowledge that your students have, and not to do it in a patronizing way. I think I've been patronized a lot before, so I have an aversion to that. I'm like, I know not, I don't ever want to do that to somebody else. And so, yeah, I think about those things a lot, and I also think about language a lot, about the words that I'm using, and how it could be perceived by other generations or cultures, or people with different experiences. Like I genuinely do try to think about that. Yeah.
Thanks for the question. I hear you, and I understand how institutionally, even in an institution that is centered in something, that it can also be different than what it is professing to do, right? And you know, no institution is perfect by any means, right? I mean, I feel like that's something we learned over the pandemic for sure, that it's not perfect. But I agree, and kind of going off what Carissa said, that it is, for me, so there's nothing that, I mean, this is a complicated question, first of all, and that's okay, I like complicated things. From a faculty platform and a faculty perspective, that is a problem with the institution, with any institution. It wouldn't be that particular institution alone. It would be a systematic critique, right, on institutions that need to listen, first of all, to their constituents, which in a university or a college is their students. So, you know, so you need to be listened and heard in situations like that, and then go through like a consultation process to figure out something besides your, I'm assuming, just leaving, you know, because that doesn't do anybody good. It doesn't do you good, first, definitely, or your future, or the institution. So that's a systematic problem. Okay, so I don't know if that answers your question, or that's just saying like, I hear you, bro, I hear you. But you know, what do you do about that? Well, you can write letters, you can go back, you can make them listen to you, you can find advocates, you know, these are things that we can do. It is a lot of changing and challenging worldviews, as you said, right? Like how we look at the world, how we see it. And in a classroom environment on the first day, how we look at the world and how we see it is hopefully going to be very different than the last day. We will be looking at the world differently, and that is also a goal, right? Like, we're not taking this class and paying for it and teaching it because we already collectively know everything. You know, like, or else we would just have dinner together or something. We're there for learning and exchanging and changing and inspiring our worldviews to build a future differently. I don't know. There's always an impulse to find a solution. You know, that impulse to find a solution is like the land acknowledgement or using decolonize when there's nothing actually in practice happening to decolonize. Those are impulsive, and the fact is that we can't change things overnight, or in a semester, or in 16 weeks. I'm not going to change anything by getting a PhD, you know, like, so it's small steps all the time, making changes, making interventions, you know, saying things, being heard, making small pieces. That is how I think that we can begin to change worldviews, to decolonize, to build better futures and better institutions that are not going to, that are going to serve you better and different ways. You want to try it? Yeah. You have to say a precursor. This is not on the Institution of American Indian Arts. I work there. This is my thoughts.
No, I mean, I've experienced a lot of the same challenges, and not just in the classroom, but you know, just every day. I'm a small woman who works at a metal shop, and kind of, you know, what I've learned, and I guess how, I don't want to say how I get through it, but you know, how I go through the world, you know, is just making sure that I'm holding my own space and making sure that I'm heard, whether people are listening to me or not. It doesn't necessarily matter, it's the fact that I'm saying it and that I'm making sure that how I'm feeling and what I'm going through, people are aware of, and yeah, just, you know, just making sure that you're doing as much as you can, but also at the same time that you've taken a step back and looked at all perspectives, and most of the time I kind of come back to my original side, but also, you know, understanding that people learn differently and people were taught differently, and everyone has their own perspective, and you can help by presenting yours.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the question.
Any other question? So I wanted to speak to what you were talking about earlier. I was on campus at UNM, and there was this beautiful girl, and she was rolling along. She was wonderful. She was wearing her pajamas. Right, this is what you've been talking about. And I had seen her another time and didn't have the opportunity to speak to her, and I just came right up to her. And I've been seeing this with all of these youngsters because they're all wearing the clothes that we came up with in the 70s, and they're wearing them perfectly. And they have incredible bell bottoms, and they do all this stuff. And so I walked up to her and I said, "You guys are amazing." And she was wearing this really 70s looking thing. And I said, "This is amazing." And she said, "Yes, because we're gonna do it right this time." And so I wanted to tell you that it's not so much the confidence, it's the necessity. And so it was nice when you used the word necessary, because that's what they're doing, is they're just really pulling all these perspectives together and pulling so much of their own identity into it. And really also what I love about it is combining all of the creativity of, they're really pulling a lot of wonderful inspiration from all generations. And so I agree with you that there's this beautiful thing going on with possibility and purpose and all that. And then I just wanted to say to you, the key thing to know about any experience that you have is it's incredibly valuable for you to know what you want and to be able to edit for yourself what your experiences are. At no point in your life should you ever make an experience that you've had be about anybody but you. You know so much more about yourself by having had this opportunity, which was very, So remember, it's really made you stronger, okay?
Okay, I have a lot of questions, but I think for this platform, I'm really fascinated and baffled and all of those good feelings and the post-pandemic responses. First with like the collaboration, I think that really is pleasing, and I think I'm really like, wow, extreme optimism. And I kind of want to unpack that a tad more in regards to, like, especially during an era where Roe versus Wade has been overturned. The reproductive rights are like, I think there's a death penalty in South Carolina for women now. And so that scares the heck out of me. But like also the transphobic legislation that's being passed. And I'm just really curious the ability to continue this like really optimistic idea of future. The imagining of it, and I guess
I
that's it.
didn't want to interrupt it.
It's okay.
I got the pause wrong, sorry.
It's okay.
So I think maybe they're not jaded yet. Like that's where the optimism is coming from.
Almost in 10 years.
Yeah, but it kind of reminds. But I think it's like that. There's that possibility. But I also think it's like oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of them, but they're like climate activists, and they're youth climate activists, and they're very active in El Paso. It's this group, and I'm like their groupie. Like I'm too old to be really part of their club, but they have no, like I'm so proud of the work that they do. Like they have no qualms in calling out politicians and leaders in the region, El Paso Electric, for doing repulsive things to the, or trying to make repulsive decisions that impact the environment, and they have this like heart fire. They have this heart fire that they want, and perhaps it's kind of what you were saying. It is out of necessity in a way. Like if they don't do that, then what else is going to happen? And so that perhaps could be it. Yeah, it. Yeah, I'm not sure. It could. I don't think it's naivety, though. I don't think that's what it is either. And it's also possibly all the access to information that we have on the internet, and you can sort of you'd see all the bad, but then you can also see all the potential too. Yeah, some thoughts on how that might be, where that might be coming from. Yeah.
It's a question of my thoughts about it.
I guess that's maybe how I answered it.
Okay.
Okay.
No, I think you answered it fine. I just want to make sure that I don't understand it incorrectly. Collaborative, I'll kind of just go. I'm very collaborative, maybe too collaborative. I don't know. Maybe not. And I think honestly that goes back to my formative years again, being at the at IAIA and having mentors that were just like an integrated part of my life. Also, I was there during what they call the old campus, so like my classroom was the dorm room next door, so they were an integrated part of my life. But these relationships, they're just ongoing. I mentored, Jennifer Denendell at UNM. I texted her today to be like, is there something I should, with just questions. I get nervous. I can text them. I can ask them questions. They're always still collaborating with me. I speak in her class. She speaks in my class, and I just mirror and emulate and try to what would I say, like honor and I try to do what they do, in a way that is different and uniquely my own, but also in a way that serves myself but mostly like my students and even my family and things. I don't know if that makes sense or if that's too abstract, but in the collaboration thing, it's about actively mentoring all the time. And I would encourage everybody to do that, actively mentoring all the time. So if for me, if I have an opportunity that's presented to me, then my thinking is that would be cool. But then the second thought is, I will do it as long as my students can do it with me or do it ahead of me, and I can actively mentor them through this experience. It's really important to share the space on your CV with people that it's like, it just makes sense to me. Working otherwise doesn't make sense to me, and I think that's probably extreme optimism, or would have been maybe before. But I think you're right that collaboration and working collectively is where we're at, where we should have been for a long time, and where other people need to catch up and and get on the canoe with us, in the canoe.
Yeah, so thinking about this like reimagining of worlds, and yeah, it's exciting, and I think a lot of it kind of comes from the idea of like being stuck at home and the pandemic, and I think for me personally too, it's like you're a lot more aware of what's going on in the world because you have less distractions, and you're watching the news, seeing what's happening next, but along with news of the pandemic, you're getting news from other parts of the world that maybe you weren't as on top of. So I think now there's kind of a more, I guess, like generalized, like people know what's going on in the world, and more awareness, and with, the wars and everything, like people are more up to date than maybe they were before. And I think especially like with my generation, especially. And so I think the reimagining of worlds kind of comes from that, and also just, the funny thing about Zoom is when you're presenting, you don't get to read when people aren't paying attention. So you just get to keep going and going and going. So you develop this confidence, and I think that's also presenting itself, is that students now are more confident to share their ideas in front of groups of people.
Thank you. How are we doing with time? Maybe one more question if there is, otherwise.
Do you encourage your students to vote?
have to, because I have a student that encourages people to vote through their art practice right there in Anarati Junior. Anarati Junior. Everybody get up for it. And are encouraging everyone to vote.
It's true. I try to encourage everyone to vote. I think that, yeah, it's you know, again, like with the awareness of the news and everything, you know, it's one of the ways that you can actually change. So.
I sure do. In fact, I took one of my students to vote last semester. No, I think voting, yeah, I definitely believe that voting is important, and it's not to push any kind of political opinion on my students, but it is to talk about sort of our civic responsibility to one another, and yes, the answer is yes.
For tribal elections too. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all the knowledge you shared tonight with us. Thank you for coming. And the work of Carissa, Marcella, and Jasmine is in the exhibition, so if you haven't checked it out yet, come back. We open until May with this exhibition. And thank you, and see you soon again. Have a good evening.